Hutchinson, sales manager at 91, has worked in the financial service industry for more than 30 years and confesses that during this time, he's made a number of investment mistakes, some more costly than others. So today on Smart Money, he's going to be very candid about some of the worst investment decisions he's made along the way. But more importantly, he's going to be sharing his lessons learned. Paul, great to have you with us and to have you engage in some honest conversation where self-confessed, you've recognized that not contributing sufficiently to your retirement fund was one of your first big missteps. Where did you go wrong? And how are you advising others to approach their retirement fund savings instead?
Thank you, Alishia. Indeed. So I think where I went wrong in the case of not contributing enough to my retirement fund was when I was young, I had a young family. And when you're a young family, you've got two parents contributing to the household. And unfortunately, we got divorced at a relatively young age. And what you realize fairly quickly is moving from one household to two households increases your expenditure across both parents quite significantly. So what you do fairly early on is you look at your expenses. And what I did is I reduced my contribution to my retirement savings to the minimum. So when I started working, I was at 15%. Following my divorce, I reduced it down to 7 or 8% at the minimum. And that wasn't the mistake. That was just financial reality. You need to have a roof over your head and to provide a meal on the table. But my mistake was when my financial circumstances improved, I didn't immediately start incrementally increasing my contribution to my retirement fund, such that many years later, when you start to think about retirement yourself and you look at your accumulated retirement pot, I very quickly realized that I was nowhere near where I needed to be. And so if I look at my circumstances today, I'm well above 20% in terms of my contribution rate. And I accept that even with that high contribution rate, I've missed out on those compounding years. And what people don't really appreciate is the benefit of compound interest only really comes to the fore over decades. So at my early 50s, I realized I was well behind. And my reality is that I'm going to have to work a few more years than I had perhaps originally planned to.
Yeah, especially, Paul, if you start to consider the erosive effect of annual fees on total returns, right? And that's something you didn't fully appreciate either. So how's that impacted your savings pot?
Yeah. So I think, like many people, I changed employers within the first 5 years of my working career. And at the time, I was convinced, and I accept some responsibility of this decision myself. Clearly, I have to invest or to transfer my accumulated retirement savings into an old school life company retirement annuity, which comes with costs that you don't fully appreciate. And 27 years later, now that retirement annuity has matured, I estimate those costs to have reduced what I could have accumulated by half. And so costs are material, and I think everybody needs to understand and appreciate that you should be prepared to pay a higher cost for a superior outcome, but you need to have done the work, and I clearly hadn't done the work. And what I also came to realize too late is that you also need to read the small print. So when I signed that application form, I hadn't fully appreciated that if I wanted to exit that retirement annuity and transfer it to perhaps another provider, the surrender penalties would have been prohibitive. And I would never have been able to offset that surrender penalty by what I could have earned through an alternative product. So 2 lessons. One, make sure you fully appreciate what you're buying and read the small print. And that's true for all assets that one buys.
Yeah, I want to home in on that, Paul. For those figuring out, that the ongoing fees associated with the retirement annuity that they've signed up to, for example, are in fact punitive, but are trapped by early surrender penalties that would be payable, that would be impossible to recover in the remaining time that they have. What's the advice on that front?
I think the advice on that front is really look to ensure that you are making investments that will compensate you for the under return that you're going to get from that old school retirement annuity, for example. But also the regulator has changed the rules, and those surrender penalties are reducing over time. So keep paying attention and keep contacting your retirement annuity provider to understand what the retirement what the surrender penalty will be today, and then decides to phone them next year to see if that's reduced further. And at some point in time, you may be in a position to transfer the retirement annuity to a new provider.
Well, coming hand in hand with all of this, of course, is recognizing that there aren't quick wins here, right? Investor sentiment will have you chasing the rand, for example, or have you focus on short-term performance or underperformance, for that matter. To what extent are these factors to consider in one's investment strategy?
Critical. So again, a personal experience in the early 2000s. For those of us that will remember, the rand blew out from around 6 rand to the dollar to 12 rand to the dollar. And everybody's sentiment in South Africa was incredibly negative at the time. And everybody was talking about trying to transfer money offshore. The regulators were making it a little bit easier for us to do so. And I think that also contributed a little bit to the rand going as more and more South Africans were converting rands to dollars. So the momentum went against the currency to a degree. And I chased it myself. And the realization subsequently was that while the rand does depreciate and has depreciated at around 6% per annum over the long term, there are periods of time when the rand will strengthen and does strengthen. And it feels like we're in one of those periods again. And so we've had a situation where South Africans have once again chased the currency, only for the currency to strengthen. And the reality is that it's best to consult qualified financial advisors to properly understand what that offshore investment is doing within a holistic financial plan. So to properly understand and not just be influenced by market commentary, by market sentiments, by friends, colleagues, family, and make decisions just based on one variable.
Yeah. I touched on there as well, where there's a risk in focusing just too much on short term performance as well, or short term underperformance on the other hand. When, based on your experience, is it a good idea to actually make a change to your investment strategy?
So I think when your circumstances have changed. So clearly, in the event that your circumstances have changed materially, it's important to reconsider your financial plan. It's also important to reconsider underlying investments if there have been changes to the portfolio management team, for example, and broader circumstances within an investment firm. It may be warranted, but more often than not, it's best to simply remain invested in your current investment plan unless there have been these broad changes to your personal circumstances or the investment firm with whom you are invested.
Okay, so we've got it. Do not alter your investment strategy or its execution unless it was incorrect at the outset or your personal or financial circumstances changed, right? But there is such a thing as holding on too long, right?
Absolutely. And often you hold on too long when you're just not paying attention. And so another personal circumstance, years ago, I transferred money to direct offshore investment, and the offshore investment was doing relatively okay. And as a result, I was simply too lazy to effect a change. For people listening, when you make an offshore investment, it comes with heaps and heaps of paperwork. And the mere thought of resupplying all that documentation just was too much to bear. So every time I looked at it, I knew at the back of my mind I should be doing something. I should be making one change or another. But then thinking about everything that accompanied having to do that change, I just decided not to do anything. And on reflection, I think simply staying put cost me between 3 to 4% per annum in dollars over a long period of time, which makes for a meaningful underperformance of what I could have had at that point in time.
On the extreme end of that, Paul, have you made an investment that went to zero?
Yeah, not my favorite investment. So in the late 90s, all the rage was small cap listings on the JSE, and I came across a firm that had done exceptionally well, and they had made available a private equity vehicle to certain clients. And I thought this was a wonderful opportunity to back a manager that had done incredibly well in the listing. This private equity deal, unfortunately, had exposure to a single asset class, And over a period of time, my not inconsequential investment realized zero. And the lesson there is clearly one of diversification. Listeners would have heard the term diversification many times, and this is a real example of not having exposure to a single asset class for which you're also paying exorbitant fees, because private equity vehicles tend to be more expensive than traditional collective investment scheme type investments.
Look, it's hard not to be enticed by a lure, right? It's an expensive lesson. It could be an expensive lesson, but an important lesson in humility and keeping grounded as well. So, Paul, thanks so much for having joined us today with some of your insights. Paul Hutchinson is sales manager at 91.
Thank you.